It's time for another WrestlePlanet news update, as 2 new championships are expected to be added to AEW. Kenny Omega wants Roman Reigns in All Elite Wrestling, and Marty Scurll is set to make his return after nearly 2 years out. All that and more coming up in today's video, but first... Last night's AEW Dynamite Grand Slam surprisingly opened up with the ultimate dream match between AEW World Champion Kenny Omega taking on Bryan Danielson in what many anticipated would be the main event. The match did not disappoint, and once you know the finish, you can see why AEW chose to put it on first. With the crowd in the palm of their hands, Bryan and Omega would battle for the entire 30-minute time limit, resulting in a draw, which no doubt sets up a rematch at some point in the future. It's very likely that Bryan and Omega will take part in a trilogy, and Omega has hinted at a rematch somewhere down the line, ironically by ruling it out. With Kenny being the heel champion and Bryan being so close to finishing him off, he no doubt in character wants no part of Danielson going forward, although it seems inevitable that they'll meet again somewhere down the line. After the match, the Elite would run out to save Omega from a label lock, before Bryan was struck by a triple superkick from the Young Bucks and Adam Cole. Christian Cage and Jurassic Express would head to the ring to even the odds, as AEW kicked the show off with a bang. Elsewhere on the show, Cody Rhodes would get his rematch against Malachi Black, who swiftly defeated him in under 5 minutes just last month. This is Cody's first bout since that incident, as he's been away recording the Go Big Show for TBS. Rhodes would be accompanied by his regular coach Arn Anderson, as well as his wife Brandi Rhodes, who returns to AEW television following a recent pregnancy. During the match, Arn would take a fall off the apron while setting up a spot before being knocked off in the pre-planned collision. Hopefully he is okay, as the first fall looked rough, although he was up and about straight afterwards. In the end though, Cody would lose to Black once again, and as predicted, Cody would receive a ton of boos from the crowd, who were hugely in favour of his opponent. Whilst a full-blown heel turn wasn't triggered, it seems inevitable at this point, as the AEW fanbase continues to reject him. Black is now 5-0 in the men's singles division, as his reign of terror continues. Next up, AEW have given fans an update on their upcoming move from TNT to TBS. The move was announced in May, and it was previously expected that Rampage and Dynamite would change networks, with TNT and TBS both being under the Warner Media umbrella. However, it has now been confirmed that it will just be Dynamite changing homes. The switch will take place on January 5th, which is the first Wednesday of 2022. This should help AEW in terms of the ratings, with TBS often drawing a younger skewing audience than TNT. AEW already do well in this department, having been ranked number 1 on cable for 4 weeks in a row in the 18 to 49 demographic, and this move will only help in this aspect. AEW Dynamite has 14 episodes left on TNT before the move. Anthony Bowens, one half of The Acclaimed, appeared on the AEW Unrestricted podcast this week, hosted by Aubrey Edwards and Tony Schiavone. Bowens discussed his previous experience in WWE, where he has worked as an extra and enhancement talent, and he revealed a scary incident that happened during his match, and he said, "Are you referencing the Authors of Pain match? That didn't go so well. There ended up being a big, I don't want to call it a botch, it was a botch. They powerbombed me and another dude got powerbombed on top of me, which ended up landing on my face and knocked me out. From the video, it kind of looked like I had a small seizure in there. It was a very scary moment and went from, hey, this is my opportunity, to I hope I'm alive the next day. So that was one of my only opportunities I had in the ring with them." Bowens then discussed whether he was ever close to signing with WWE, revealing that he was reached out to after he started working on AEW Dark, and said, "I did a bunch of other work in terms of commercial stuff, and then I had 2 tryouts with them. I had one at the Arnold Classic in 2015 and another one at the Performance Center, and that's what kind of led to the whole situation I explained before, where they said that I was in line for an opportunity to be signed in 2017, and then I didn't hear from them for 3 years, and then eventually I did right after I worked with AEW, but nothing too extensive." I had no idea that Bowens had worked in WWE until I read this, but I guess that adds one name to a potential video about AEW wrestlers you didn't know appeared in WWE, but I guess that you know now, but yeah, you know what I mean. CM Punk appeared on the Wrestling with Brandon Walker show this week in the build-up for AEW Grand Slam. Punk brought up the newly announced relationship between All Elite Wrestling and the Owen Hart Foundation, with an Owen Hart Cup as well as merchandise, action figures and a video game appearance all on the horizon. Punk spoke of the deal and said, "It blows me away, and I just think it's another eye-opening aspect of AEW. For 20 years there was one place, and if you didn't want to deal with them, then you're kind of out of sight, out of mind." Point in case, Owen Hart Foundation, Martha Hart and CM Punk, and what AEW has done is got me back after 7 years, and then they did what I categorize as the unthinkable. We're gonna get Owen toys, Owen shirts, Owen in a video game, and that's amazing for his legacy. It is great that Owen's legacy will finally be properly celebrated within a wrestling space, with him being one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. And speaking of greats, one of the topics that came up was the best in the world, a moniker Punk took on during his 2011 run in WWE. He was asked who he thinks is the best in the world today, coming up with 3 main contenders for the title, and he said, "You could say it's Bryan Danielson, you could say it's Kenny Omega, there's an argument for Roman Reigns. I think now, in 2021, like I said, I think this has been the murkiest it's been in a very long time." We're at a time with wrestling where there is many top names spread across multiple promotions, and it really is tricky to pick just one. But who do you think is the best in the world? Let me know in the comments down below. Yesterday we discussed a report from Andrew Zarian of the Mat Men podcast, who revealed AEW are in talks to bring in a secondary women's championship. We now have an update from Denise Salcedo, who hosted Zarian on her Speak Now Pro Wrestling show, where the name of the title was potentially revealed. Salcedo took to Twitter to say, "Andrew Zarian reported news today on my show. He said there will be a secondary women's championship on AEW, and it will be a TBS championship belt." The story broke immediately after last night's AEW Dynamite Grand Slam, and Zarian also hinted that a men's trios championship could be introduced soon. AEW Dynamite will move to the TBS network next year, which means the new women's title will likely be held off until the move from TNT. And speaking of women's championships, last night's Dynamite was main evented by a match for the AEW Women's World Championship, where Britt Baker would successfully defend her title against Ruby Soho after interference from her friends Rebel and Jamie Hayter allowed an opportunity to make Ruby submit to a lockjaw. This is Baker's 4th defense in her reign, which now extends past the 116-day mark. And quickly, just before we continue, make sure you drop a like on the video as it helps me out a lot, and make sure you subscribe with notifications turned on so you don't miss any upcoming wrestling content as we head, hopefully, towards 100,000 subscribers. But now, let's press play on the video. This week, AEW World Champion Kenny Omega spoke with Japanese publication Tokyo Sports about the growth of AEW, with the promotion being the first real alternative to WWE in a number of years. Omega would talk about looking forward to a future match with CM Punk, as well as his opponent on last night's AEW Dynamite Grand Slam, Bryan Danielson. Omega would speak of both men and said, "Both CM Punk and Bryan are the people who called themselves best, and wrestled in the place called the best. But when I'm against them, I don't have to say that I'm the best because it was the fans, not myself, who started calling me the best. Now I want to prove them right." Kenny was asked if more wrestlers would make the jump from WWE to AEW, and was asked if he could sign any wrestler, who would it be, and he responded, "Absolutely, more will come out in the future. I think about 90% of wrestlers in WWE want to be in AEW. There are already a lot of people coming, so I don't really know who. If I was forced, I'd say Roman Reigns. I think it's a good opportunity to prove who the real champion is." Whilst it's highly unlikely that Reigns would ever make the jump to AEW, with him being Vince's poster boy, he is no doubt the standout in the company right now, and a match between Roman Reigns and Kenny Omega would make for some very interesting television. Next up, Marty Scurll is set to make his return to wrestling, making his first appearance since February 2020. Scurll has been absent from the scene since allegations were made against him during the Speaking Out movement last year, which led to his release from Ring of Honor, where he worked as a wrestler and booker for the promotion. He was set to appear on New Japan Strong in January, but despite taking part in the tapings, he was pulled from the final cut due to complaints from fans. It has now been announced that his return will take place in Puerto Puerto Rico for the CWA promotion, who posted a video on Instagram hyping up his appearance. He is once again being billed as the villain, whilst being described as evolved. He will be at the CWA Halloween Fan Fest on October 23rd, 2021, although no match has been officially announced. And before you go, make sure you check out my video where I discuss the secret wrestling returns of CM Punk before he showed up in AEW.